Hey, I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Matt King.
And we are the Video Island Podcast.
That's right. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about how we established our video styles and how you can go about building out your own.
All right, so on today's episode, we want to talk about just kind of, I guess, establishing your style when it comes to your productions, whether it's shooting, editing, motion graphics, music, the whole thing, pretty much, the whole kebab when it comes to your production style. Now, there will be those staples when that comes through your personal approach, but then there's also the approach with doing it, in regards to the brand and what makes it stand out as recognizable as a brand video versus somebody else's video. We also want to just kind of talk about, just what has influenced us, where we started, share some examples of what we do that we tend to apply to our edits, shooting, whatever it be in terms of production. So I guess let's just kick it off from there. Is there anything that stands out to you that you'd like to share with our viewers, our listeners, that you generally do when it comes to your productions?
Yeah, I think it just comes from, you have you see what you like, obviously, over time, and you build that into your own kind of way of doing things, doing productions, things like that. So like over the course of over 10 years now, obviously, probably 13 years or so now, 14 years of doing this kind of stuff, often you kind of pick up little things from people, little secrets, little tips, all that kind of stuff. And from everything from the way you set up your camera, the lenses you choose for framing an individual up versus framing, your B-roll, all that kind of stuff, lighting, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's kind of like, I always kind of, particularly within our workplace, I like to make sure that I set things up a certain way that has an approachable factor to it. So I think when people get into setting up video, they start off with, okay, I'm gonna have somebody on camera, and naturally I'm just gonna have them kind of center frame kind of thing, and like looking at camera. It's like, well, consider the option of like what you've seen in the past and what makes you more comfortable, right? So if I'm doing a talking head style video, maybe it's an interview, maybe I'm doing a customer testimonial maybe, I don't necessarily want that person typically to be looking at the camera for one thing, but I also don't want that person to necessarily be center frame. It's center frame is a very direct and very hard-edged framing type. So I like to typically, in that style of video, for example, I always aim to have that person off to one side of the frame. It's a pretty classical thing to do, is to offset your individual in the frame. And then what you usually do too is that wherever your individual is looking at the interviewer, they are going to be, that individual on camera is going to be looking off into that space. So take, for example, I'm on the right, on the, let's see, what side am I framed here? If somebody's looking, I'm on somebody's left side of the frame. So if they're watching this on YouTube, if I were to kind of turn my body a little bit, if I'm looking off camera, so somebody's interviewing me, I'm gonna have some lead room so that my eyes kind of carry off into the side of the frame. So you don't typically want to kind of necessarily frame up somebody in the center and then have them look off frame. It's kind of like you're not giving enough space for their eye line to kind of carry off into the distance.
There's much balance to it, right?
No, there's not a lot of balance. And so, but that also means you have to be paying attention to what's in behind. You can't have something that's not necessarily relevant to the video that you're making in behind as your background. So that's when you want to pay attention to what lenses you're using or the camera that you're using, if it's a fixed lens camera, in terms of, softening your background so you're getting that shallow depth of field. So maybe your background isn't the most important thing or doesn't really add a lot of context to the video that you're making. But consider, using a shallow depth of field to just have a more basic, soft background so that your subject is the most important thing in the frame. Something that I've seen recently that's kind of like I guess it's like the attempt at breaking the rules for the sake of being kind of artsy and doing things differently, is that like I said, as opposed to having that leading space across the frame of when that person's framed up on the one side of your shot, people are doing interviews where they're framing people fairly close with their nose almost touching the edge of the frame. So the leading space is behind them in the frame. So we are obviously taught within school, within a video production class, to not generally do that, right? Because you're losing that lead space, and you're not necessarily following a natural eye line. This causes discomfort within the viewer, subtly, all that kind of stuff. So it adds like a certain weird edge to the frame.
Yeah.
To the scene.
Well, and not to interrupt, but like even in that sake of having that person, you have that space between them where they're looking and the side of the frame. In the situation where you're going to use a lower third or any other graphics, you do have that space to insert that stuff there without it being too congested.
That's right.
Whereas if you have that person,
Framed
same
up.
framing, but they're facing the other way, it would look funny if you have the lower third or any graphic behind them.
That's right.
Like unless they're like it's purposely done for the style or the approach that you want to do.
That's right. It's strange though.
But honestly, I just don't see why.
I'm seeing it more and more though. So I've watched everything from interview with athletes to some, maybe it's a video produced for a department of a college or something like that. I've watched all kinds of different videos that use that kind of framing just to change things up. But to me, it's like I would use it more for something that's supposed to make somebody feel a level of discomfort versus just generally being a part of the interview. But it teach their own. So that's just kind of something to pay attention to when you're kind of framing up your shot, is that if you're doing an interview, have them look off camera as opposed to at camera. I mean, it's different if I'm having, say, a CEO deliver an address to a company. Maybe then I might choose to have them look directly into the lens and be a little bit more center framed potentially, because it's a very direct address and they're directly communicating with the person on the other side of the lens. But there's still opportunities to do either one.
Yeah, and as you kind of say that, right, like as they're looking off the frame, the one thing to keep in mind, obviously we work together, so I see you do that, and even in the situation, like I guess to give it a little bit of context, Matt and I went to school together. We've known each other for 10 years.
Over 10 years.
I'd say. So we went to school together. We worked on some projects after school together. We did some contract freelancing work. We went our ways, and then we came back.
To work where we are now.
To where we are now. So we do have similar backgrounds, and we do kind of have influence on each other. So I would do the same thing. But in terms of the framing for that interview style, looking off camera, we've seen students or people who aren't so much experienced try to do that, but it's almost too severe where they have the person looking way off, so you're almost getting the profile view opposed to a good angle. So in those types of situations, right, you normally want that interviewer or wherever the subject's looking, because maybe in a situation you don't have an interview, it's literally you manning the camera.
That's right.
So in situations like, I'm sure you've done it, I've done it, you offset yourself to be right beside the camera that they're looking at you, but you're not too far away from the camera. And it doesn't even take much. Like,
You're standing right beside it.
You're standing right beside it, and it's just that slight angle away from the lens.
Yeah,
right?
that gets rid of that bit of harshness that would otherwise be if they're looking right at the lens.
Exactly.
But like you're exactly right. For the sake of being artsy or trying to do something edgy, it could make things a little bit odd, right? It can sometimes work as a secondary angle if you're doing a 2-camera shoot and you want that cutaway.
Severe angle.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, what you want to do when you're framing up your shot to stay safe is, particularly within like like corporate video world and things like that, is that you're always going to be focused on the eyes, obviously. So get your focus point on the individual's eyes, so to make sure those are crisp and clear, because the whole idea is that the eyes are like the doorway to an individual's soul, is the whole saying. But it's very much true when it comes to video, is that if you're doing that slightly side angle, you still don't want to lose both eyes, because there's again, a subconscious feeling of not only discomfort, but that feeling of you're lacking the truth if you're only seeing a part of their face and a part of one eye only. So all this kind of background stuff that like plays subconsciously in our minds is something to pay attention to. So seeing both eyes, even on like a harder side angle, is what you always want to kind of strive for. So it's things like that. Also too, it's like if you're going on a hard side profile, sometimes you might not be necessarily complementing the person's features as well as you could be. Maybe if they have a more pronounced nose or something like that. If you're on the hard side, you're really going to be showing that off versus kind of softening things to be a little bit more balanced within the frame. So that's something I pay attention to in terms of my framing. Again, when it comes to lens selections, I'm going to use a lens that's a little bit more of a close-up lens, more of a portrait style lens. So anything that's about a 50 millimeter focus focal distance or above that, because that's your standard portrait style lens. And what that means is that versus being fully wide angle on my shot and framing up my individual in an interview, like a medium or a close-up shot for my interview, they're going to be very bowed and distorted, because the wider angle you go and the closer in you go to an individual, the more of that bowing and distortion you're going to have. So effectively, it's like the wider angle and the closer you are to something, the more of that fisheye effect you effectively start to get, right? So you want to kind of typically do the opposite for most standard interviews. Typically, especially within the business world, is that you want to be a little bit more complimentary and a little bit more slimming to their features in their body. So if you use a more zoomed in lens, like a 50 millimeter, 100 millimeter, 150 millimeter, you're going to be complementing them a little bit more by it kind of slims them just very mildly. And again, the focus becomes more on them. So you'll find too that you're getting less of the background behind them once you do the same kind of framing as you would if you were to use the same get the same framing on a wide angle. So test that out. So it's like, I've shown this to people. So it's like, take a really wide angle lens and frame an individual up for an interview. Say you're doing like from chest to head up.
So let's just throw out a lens, for example, because a good one that we use all the time is the 24 to 105. So let's use that for example, where you have the constant aperture with the camera or with the lens, sorry. You have the ability to obviously zoom in.
Go from a wide to a pretty zoomed in option as well. That's a great lens made by Canon if you can pick one of those up. But say if you were to frame up that individual, and you do this on your camera, you take a 24 millimeter or equivalent wide angle lens and frame them up from chest to head kind of thing, and take a snap. The widest point, and on the lens, and take a shot of that, and then zoom in on the lens and pull the camera back and get the same framing, chest to head, and you'll see what it does for not only their facial features and body, but for the background. And which one's probably more complementary. I'm going to say that more zoomed in one is going to be the more complementary.
You'll see less of the background and the foreground, your subject.
You're distorting them a little bit less and giving them a less of that bent kind of like bowed out fisheye look to them. So that's something to pay attention to. Try it out. Even on fixed lens cameras, if you were to take like a simple handy cam and zoom out and do the same thing, and then zoom in a decent amount, back up so that you can get that same kind of framing as the wide angle, you're going to get that same effect. Something to pay attention to. Outside of that, in terms of my lighting, I often for our lighting, we're doing like a 3-point lighting setup. So we're using 2 lights in front and then 1 light behind to kind of pull. The light behind is going to be a hair light, so that it kind of pulls them off of that subject off of the background. Within our space, within the business world, that seems to do a pretty good job. I'll typically light them fairly even with the background, or if I find that I'm in a background or in a space that the background doesn't really kind of add context or much flavor to what the video is about, I'll brighten up my lights a little bit more so that I expose my lens or my camera for that brightness level of the lights. And what you'll see is that being that there's no lights on the background, is that background starts to darken a little bit. And so you're putting more emphasis on that individual and less emphasis on that individual within the space. So that's a nice little trick to be able to kind of play around with, is like the different neutral lighting setup versus a more subject emphasized lighting setup. So those are some of the things that I typically kind of go into when I'm doing my framing for a standard interview. But that kind of carries across the board. If I'm, getting a B-roll shot of something and it's on, say it's a laptop on a table or whatever, again, I can have the same thing where I want to show off the laptop or whatever piece of software is on that laptop, whatever, or somebody working on that laptop. I'm going to pay attention to what's in my background. Do I need the background in focus or not? Or do I just want my individual in focus? Mixed with, again, the lighting that I use for that shot. Do I want that background to be just as important as that laptop on the table? Or do I want it to kind of fall off a little bit and have the laptop and whatever's on that laptop be the star? All those things is kind of something that I take into consideration. So yeah, that's kind of like the way I approach like a production, generally speaking. Again, the other thing too, aside from like the framing, is the audio. So as much as we can, I like using a shotgun microphone. I find the audio to be really good, but oftentimes we're using a lavalier microphone like what we're wearing. Typically though, on most testimonial productions or anything like that, I'm going to try and hide the microphone. So for this kind of format, it's okay because it's not as important that we hide the microphone per se. It's no real secret. But in terms of those kinds of productions, like interview-based or campaign, higher level video, you don't really want to see the microphone on somebody, so try and hide those. Testimonial, all that kind of stuff is a really good thing to just, to me it's like, if you're seeing the microphone on like a video testimonial, it's like the same thing as like seeing the lighting. So like I wouldn't see a light behind somebody when I frame them up for a customer testimonial shoot, so why am I seeing the microphone clipped on them? Just buy some gaffer tape and hide that microphone on their within their clothing, and and then it's less distracting for the viewer watching. Like, oh, like you're seeing part of the production or part of the set. It's just kind of funny. So yeah, those are some of the things.
So for me, like when I'm doing shoots now, for you obviously know, and then for our viewers and listeners who've maybe tuned into our other episodes, know that I like to dwell in the motion graphics and After Effects world. So I kind of have this, and it's kind of a double-edged sword for me because I always have this like habit of wanting to add motion to things, even if it is like shooting something with a camera. So like, yes, you can go a long way and you can do some cool things by adding motion to your shot. A big, when we were getting into this, Philip Bloom was a videographer, or I guess a director of photography, who did a lot of pretty awesome work. And I remember he came out with the pocket dolly, I believe it was called. So someone we knew had one, and he would let us use it. And I remember getting my hands on this dolly or a slider, and everything I was shooting
you're making it
had slides, right? And it looks cool, and having something in the foreground, revealing something in the background. So an example of that would be having the slider maybe behind a wall, ever so slightly behind a corner as you pull out, and you're revealing maybe somebody hammering away at something, whatever.
In the distance.
Exactly.
It's used. It's a great tool for like establishing a scene, right?
So I love doing shots like that, dollying in, backwards, back and forth. Can't really do so much, I guess, crane work. You could if you really wanted to, if you had the right accessories for it. And yes, you could do that kind of crane style, or unless you got makeshift with it. But
I think it depends on your video, right? Too. It's like, is that motion adding some entertainment and some value to what I'm shooting, or am I just putting sliding in and dollying, like trucking and dollying for the sake of just making the camera move?
And so, from the instance of interviews, you don't want that. So if you had one camera, you wouldn't want to be sliding back and forth during the whole interview. It'd be pretty nauseating, just literally back and forth, left to right. So it's good though in the situation that you're talking about, when you have multiple cameras and you have that secondary angle, you have that primary, because we've done it before, where you do have that primary camera that is your go to a cam, where you're primarily going to be showing the interviewer or interviewee, giving their answers, their sound bites, etc. But you did have that option of having that secondary camera that is a little bit wider, because you have your subject in I guess the foreground, then you have that, whether it's office space, whatever it be in the background, and as you slide, and you're not moving so much, but you just have that subtle motion, and you see that kind of parallaxing,
right?
Which is your subject, because especially while you're sliding, and you have the tripod head or the plate that the camera's sitting on, being able to pan.
Yeah.
So as you're sliding, you can be angled one way. It kind of gives it that circular effect.
Right. Yeah. You keep your subject in the same frame, but you're sliding
while panning the camera head. It gives a very cool parallax effect. And for that secondary camera that you're going to cut to for the interview, it looks really good. And that's mean. And you don't want to have it be overkill. You know, be tasteful with it and sprinkle it in throughout the edit. And yeah, and it comes a long way.
Yeah.
And even from a B-roll standpoint, adding that motion as well looks great. It gives it that cinematic feel or look to it.
And it buys you a little bit more time too, because I feel like if you have like a static item that you're getting a B-roll shot of, you can probably only be on that static item depending on, like, if it's not doing anything really. Say it's a laptop, right? You can only stay on that laptop just like there on like a screen for 3 seconds. But if you have use, like, for example, a slider, and you add a left to right or like a front to back motion to it, you know, you're trucking or you're kind of dollying on that motion of that laptop, sometimes you get like 6 seconds. So you kind of doubled your ability to extend the use of that clip for longer because there's interest still happening, right?
Well, and the cool thing to it too is, like, if you even want to have that focus, like a pull on the focus, you don't even actually have to physically do it.
Right.
It's just a matter of set your focus point, and then so whether you want it to come into focus or out of focus, you obviously have that established, and just by moving the camera in and out, will automatically do that because it has that distance set, and then when you obviously adjust that distance, it's either going to be coming in or out of focus, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a cool effect. Now, on the other end of that, just in regards to when I'm shooting sometimes and I don't have a slider, so I've done this when I've just gone on vacation. I made, like, I was in South Africa, I was in Japan, and these were big trips for me. Like, I wanted to obviously capture as much as I could while I was there, just for the sake of having the memories and reflecting. I didn't have a slider or anything like that, but at the same time, I did have a tripod, and sometimes I didn't, so thankfully there's a warp stabilizer that helped me out there.
Fixed with the shake.
Yeah, but what I would sometimes do, and I've done this as well with interviews or with, you know, talking heads, B-roll, whatever it be, shoot. I just keep in mind that I want to shoot a little. I'll shoot a little bit wider, especially in the instance whether it's 4K footage, or even if it was 1080 footage, because we've worked with the Canons, like even the 5D. I have the 6D personally, and you want to do that kind of slow-mo effect, so doing the whole shoot at 60 frames and then convert it back to 24. It only shoots at 720, so if you want to use that footage, you're sometimes in that situation where you inevitably have to edit at 720.
Yeah, 720p versus 1080p.
Exactly. So in those situations, sometimes I'll just shoot a little bit wider, and then when I bring that footage into post, because maybe it's a nice scenic shot of a building and whatnot, and I just bring it into post, I can maybe scale it up a little bit. So maybe I'm just working at a 1080, the sequence is 1080, and the footage I shot is a bit wider. What I can do is, to get the desired look, maybe scale it up by 10%.
Right.
It doesn't, just by that increment, it doesn't cause that much of a degrade in the quality, but it does give you that little bit of cushion. So what you can now do, that it's obviously not the exact, because everything, it's just a flat image. You're essentially doing a digital zoom, whether you're just to scale it up by 10%, or if you were to, you know, set the keyframes and have it, you know, pan from left to right. The Ken Burns effect, pretty much, which is it's known as, but it's basically doing that in post with your footage still provides that subtle motion, especially when it's a static shot. Maybe the footage isn't necessary, because maybe there's a flag blowing and whatnot, but you want to add a little bit more motion to that shot. You can go about it that way. And yes, it's a hacky, scrappy approach to if you want to establish that type of motion that you would get out of a slider. And it works, right?
We don't have all the money in the world. We have to get scrappy with it, so it's a great tip.
Well, we do have a slider though.
Yeah, we do, but not everybody does.
Not everyone does, I know.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I generally do when I'm shooting, because, and we've talked about it before, it's like, think about the edit while you're shooting, right? Because it's more helpful in the long run when you have these ideas in mind, opposed to just shooting randomly and then come the edit. You're like, well, I want to do it this approach, but then you're like, well, I don't have the right footage.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's something actually to add to that too. It's like when I'm thinking about my edit, I think we'll move. We can move on to editing. I want to know what you're. But yeah, but like the last thing I was just thinking of was like, I know I like to tell people when I do B-roll, when I'm getting a B-roll scene, if I say focus up on somebody at a computer doing work or whatever it might be, I like to break down that scene into a series of shots. So maybe I'll get a wide angle to establish that individual within their space, but then I'll get a medium shot of that person over the shoulder, or reverse. I'm getting the computer and then I'm looking over at that individual, so I'm seeing their face, or I'm going over the shoulder towards the computer, and then I'm grabbing that shot. And then the third shot could be, I'm getting their hands typing on the keyboard, or they're doing something, or right there you have 3 shots out of one scene. So and within those 3 shots, you can cut those together and build out a scene that lasts you several seconds, right? Versus just one shot.
Generally, when we do a clip of B-roll, I roughly, from starting point, aim for 3 seconds, 3 to 4 seconds. Right? So right there, if you just from those 3 shots that you're talking about, right there you have 9 seconds.
That's right. Yeah, at the minimum you have 9 seconds.
And obviously, give or take, whether you want to go a little bit longer. And it also depends on the pace of the edit.
Yeah, and depending on like my scene, if it's like a really cool space that I'm in or whatever, maybe I'll get like a more dynamic shot, so I get up on a cool angle, or I get low and go on like some, like just add a little funk and spice. But I'll get my safety shots, so to speak, and then I'll get maybe a dynamic shot just to like add in and see if I like that better, depending on how my edit comes together and what the style is. But right there, you have 3 or 4 shots that you can work with, and as opposed to just grabbing one shot of somebody working and then you move on to the next thing and just like, because then you're just going to be B-roll hunting for a lot longer versus realizing that you can extend a scene of B-roll to last over a further timeline within your video.
And what I find really rewarding with that too, when you're shooting that B-roll, extend that duration of time. So in the example that you shared of somebody typing on a keyboard, maybe record like 20 seconds of it rather than being like, all right, I have 5 seconds, that's enough. Because you want that cushion, and then do that with all the different angles and whatnot. And then when it comes to the edit, see what I find rewarding is when you put all those shots together, especially when they're like at, maybe 5 minutes from each other, at that time when you're recording, and you find those perfect moments, and when you stitch it together, like the sequence of it just comes together perfectly, that it's just a natural flow. Everything just looks like tight, it's perfect.
It seems like it all happened at one time, and it seemed like, oh, there's 3 cameras shooting at once.
Because it's like, even, and why I was saying about recording like that long duration of time is because it gives you more room to pick, right? Because say you have the person typing, and so you have that wide shot, and then you did I can't remember the exact 3 that you shared, but maybe you're shooting like over the shoulder. Okay, over the shoulder. Well, I'm saying maybe you have the wide. Maybe okay. Let's do that. So it's the wide shot. You have them picking up their mug or whatever, and they're taking a drink. For whatever reason, you recorded only 5 seconds, and that's all you have. And then you go to that next scene over the shoulder, and they're already typing. There are parts that some people may not really notice or care, but for me, it's that break, right? Of like, you have that wide shot of them sipping at their drink, just because they took a brief pause from their typing because they're thirsty. But then that next shot is them cups down, or whatever they're typing, and then there's just that disjoint right there, right?
That's right.
So if you have that 20 seconds, maybe they are drinking, they put it down and go back to typing. That's when you have the cut and then go to the over shoulder where the typing continues.
Or the opposite end of that is like if you notice that they just took a drink, it's like when you reframe for maybe a close-up of them working away, so you're framed up from the side of the computer looking over towards them on a more close-up shot, maybe then you build your thread by being like, can I get you to pick up your mug and take a drink while you're looking at the computer screen again, right? So they'll do the same thing so that you can start on the wide of them taking a drink, and then you cut over to that next shot of them finishing the drink and setting the cup down and continuing working, and then your next sequence shot is like a close-up maybe of like the keyboards, like the hand on the keyboard typing, blah, blah. That's like your threaded sequence right now, right? So it's like things like that you gotta just kind of like work on practicing and paying attention to. That starts to make things, like you said, seamless. You build a sequence and things don't feel as disjointed. So yeah, I think that's good. That's cool.
I was gonna say, so that's like, we're kind of talking about editing in terms of like your standard interview, B-roll.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you do or that you lean towards when maybe cutting together like a compilation or like a hype video or something like that?
I'm really fueled by when I'm doing like a highlight, or even like we do our year-end videos, for example, when we're taking a bunch of like outtakes and like cutting them together. I'm really fueled obviously like by whatever music track I'm using. So like that's a big factor for me. It's like I gotta gather all my footage, kind of find, grab all like my usable clips kind of thing, and then from there it's like, what's that inspiring track that's really gonna like fuel this video, particularly for like compilations or things like that. It's like, you find what that tempo is, and at the very simplest form of it, you can work on a good quality video by like cutting on the beat of, you know what I mean? So maybe you're not doing crazy cuts or anything, maybe, or like crazy effects, but maybe all you're doing is you're cutting your compilation footage to the beat of the music, right? That's a good starting point. Maybe there's opportunities, and we did it recently or you did it recently, where like you had, maybe it was text on screen or whatever it was, but there was like a really cool like do or whatever. So like every, like all those tight like beats, it's like bump, bump, ba-dum, and on those ba-dum, like you made your text go like boom, boom, and like it zooms in and it jumps to the beat or whatever. Adding that little bit of spice and flair really gives the video just that little bit more character, and it doesn't really take all that much work. You just got to scale up your text maybe a few times or whatever it is.
5% increments.
And like adding, it makes the music tie into the video a lot more if it's if you picked a good track, right? So I think that's part of the fun. Part of the frustration sometimes is trying to find a music track, because again, within our world, we have to obviously pay for licensed music, so we can't just pick Bon Jovi or whatever we want, whatever it might. Darn, no more Bon Jovi for us. But within our world, obviously, we have to have all licensed music. So we've found some, and feel free to elaborate on some of those places, but we found some sites that allow us to use some pretty decent quality music that isn't so stock sounding, and it's produced by musical artists, not super famous ones, but ones that you're getting pop music, you're getting like synthesized music, you're getting rock, folk, you're getting all kinds of different genres. Then you can break down from there to make sure that it applies to your overall your video that you're trying to create.
Yeah, so as Matt alluded to, the music libraries that we pull from are artlist.io, which is a subscription based. It's what, $200 US?
Yeah, I think it's $200 US for the
a year, and it's unlimited tracks you can download. So
that's pretty sweet.
Even like, to be honest with you, if you're going to be editing a lot of videos, even if you're a small shop, you're doing videos on the side, maybe just for weddings or whatever it be, I'd still say that's worth the value for sure.
$200, yeah. I mean, that's like a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, like for songs, sometimes to get the royalties to buying one track can sometimes cost that much.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's some sites I'd love to use, and for smaller companies, if you're a small production house and you're like 5 or 10 people, then there's different tiers based on the size of your company. So it'd be like, oh, if you're like a 10 person or less team, the price for this track is $100 a track. But like for a company our size, it's like $900. I'm like, well, we can't be paying $900 per music track. It's just not feasible.
Exactly. And then the other library that we sometimes dabble in is Envato's Audio Jungle. We sometimes pull from there, but as of lately, we've been using Artlist a lot more.
Oh yeah.
So that being said, so when you are editing, let's maybe focus on what you do personally opposed to brand-wise. When you are editing, what do you like to lean towards, I guess, in terms of finding music? Like what do you generally look for first?
In terms of finding a music track?
Finding a music track.
I start off with like trying to establish what genre of music works best for whatever video I'm making, right?
Yeah, definitely, obviously the theme and style of the video obviously comes into play there.
Yeah.
But I guess in terms of, so let's say it's a hype compilation video that you're making. Do you generally lean towards something that's more like EDM, or are you more on the hip hop side, are you more on the rock?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think I might have been a little bit more EDM before, during the EDM craze, but I really like a good like rocky song, or like a pop rock song generally, or like sometimes just like a good like hip hop beat sometimes works well. So it's not necessarily EDM per se, but it's still kind of like electronic based music because it's like hip hop backbeats and things like that. Yeah. Sometimes like a really cool like backbeat is like, yeah, that's like a really cool, like, it's not overly hardcore as rock, because sometimes rock there could be a lot of like heavy drums and cymbals and it's very built up and loud, but sometimes you just want something that like kind of fuels something without like interrupting the vibe of like whatever video clips you're putting together. Maybe particularly if you're having audio attached to that compilation, where you're having, let's say it's a blooper reel, and like a lot of the bloopers involve like the people saying something funny. You don't want something that's like too heavy of a track that like really cuts into the people talking. You want something that's a little bit more in the background but still like keeps the video going. So yeah, I'll float between like a pop rock and like a hip hop track kind of thing right now. That's what I find. Less electronic.
And I'm in the same boat. I generally, and maybe just my own personal bias, just because I have the tendency of listening to a lot of hip hop style music, and so I generally lean in that direction. Not only just because I like it, but at the same time, it actually makes it easier to edit the music. Because it's very repetitive of just based off the drum beat, and sometimes when you're done your edit of the video, it doesn't end so nicely with the end of the point in the song. So just given you can find those loops, or maybe the song isn't long enough, and then you can find just those loops and you splice it, and then maybe you duplicate that several times just to stretch it out. And it allows that. And so that's one strong reason to why I lean in that direction of using hip hop music.
I think that's important to know, right, too, because it's like I barely ever look at the length of a track that I'm looking to use or purchase, right? I barely ever, unless it's like 20 seconds, right? If my video's like a minute and a half long, I don't want to necessarily be looping the heck out of a 20 second clip of music. But if it's like a minute and a half track or 2 minute track, and my video is maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I mean, that's still plenty of content to be able to kind of, like you said, find those cuts and loop something and extend a track. So look at those options and don't really pay so much attention to the length of the track to be like, oh, like my video's a minute and a half, I need a minute and 28 second clip of music. It's like, figure out where you can make those cuts, right? So.
In the terms of editing, I'm going to shift back to more of, because yes, obviously audio goes a long way. It runs, hand in hand with the video. Especially when you edit your video to the music, it just gels together, opposed to just slapping that music in as just an undertrack. Is there anything that you steer away from that you don't necessarily like when it comes to editing? Example being, and I'm going to reference The Simpsons right now, and star swipe.
Yeah, exactly.
Using any and every transition.
Yeah, I'm very much a big fan of the less is more approach to like most kind of edits, and letting the content of the video kind of speak for itself. So I'm less trying to impress people with flashy effects per se. Effects can be good, and sometimes you want that little bit of extra something, but I don't. if I'm doing that or we're doing that, it's like we're thinking about that during the pre-production meeting. Like it's a part of the video to have these effects in place for a reason, versus like getting into my edit and being like, this like part's kind of boring or scrappy. I need to like throw something on it to be like distraction, right? Smoke bomb kind of thing. And I find like that's what when people are getting into video editing, they just try and figure out a way to make like an ugly cut kind of better by throwing on a funny transition. The easiest and simplest and most classic one being a cross dissolve or a fade. So if you have an interview and you only had one camera, it's pretty scrappy, that's all you had, you didn't really have a lot of B-roll, you just have your interview. And maybe it's like you did a 10-minute interview and you've cut down the interview to about 2 minutes. Congratulations, I know it seems hard, but it's totally doable. You got it down to 2 minutes, but then that means you have a lot of cuts in there. Try and think of other ways to cut the video without or think about like B-roll that you can create on your own off of your computer, particularly if it's a technology company that you've done an interview with or something like that. Maybe go onto their website and find some cool stuff or whatever to do screen recording stuff. But at the end of the day, I ideally don't want to like watch a interview that's just the person on camera and it just keeps cross dissolving between cuts to make it a little less harsh. I never use cross dissolves.
Yeah.
So, but I find that I don't need to, because you can almost always find a nice way to cut between a person saying something and their next sentence smooth. Even if the shot does jump, it's called a jump cut. If you like cut from a person to that same person or whatever, for example, saying something different and maybe they kind of jumped their position or slightly moved in the frame. I'd rather see that and just have like the thing kind of flow, because I've paid attention to their voice and when they took like a natural pause versus trying to cut in the middle of them saying something to butt it up against something else and it's very harsh, so I just put fades on it.
Yeah.
It takes me out of the content of the video by watching the person kind of melt behind themselves as they get like they melt on, you know what I mean? It's like, it's very jarring, so I try not to use it. Depending on the video, I might like fade up or fade out of a video, depending on the video that I'm making, but I won't cross dissolve between clips that often. Yeah. To me, it's like, the only time that I've maybe used it, it's like, if it's really appropriate in like a really soft and gentle wedding video, and it's like I'm going from like an external shot of like the wedding venue, and I'm doing some slow fade in to like maybe it's like the bridal party getting ready in a room in that venue. Maybe I could do some cool kind of fade into that scene, but again, time and a place, and depends on the style of the video. So.
Yeah, and exactly that, right? And that's more of a stylistic decision opposed to, oh, I have these two clips. How do I blend them together?
That's right. Less is more. It's again, it's that whole like putting lipstick on a pig kind of thing.
Yeah, and I putting lipstick on a pig, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and that was going to be my point.
Yeah.
So not to repeat what you said. Another thing that I think that I've seen people do, which I would stay clear from, is using the built-in like filters. That like add a stylistic approach.
Right.
I get it. If you're in high school and you're making like a high school project and
you want to try something,
and you want to just add to get away from that handy cam look, sure. But I don't know.
Let the content speak for itself. Don't try and flash it up for the sake of making something boom or explode on screen. Like, it doesn't make sense.
I'll admit to you guys, like, I'm color deficient, so I'm not good when it comes to color correcting and color grading. He knows firsthand. I've made some silly mistakes, but there are some tools like the vector scope and such that do help with that. But me personally, I still struggle from time to time. But even in those situations,
I'm here for you.
Tear.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that is one thing. Like, I will not go to, even given my situation, I will not rely on the defaults of what the editing software provides, because it just, none of them ever look good.
Yeah, they all look weird. You put on like a funky coloring, a styling effect.
Yeah, and like, you may see, if you watch YouTubers and they upload their LUTs and whatnot that you can apply that have, it doesn't always look good.
Yeah.
So if the idea is that you want to stylize your footage, maybe you're shooting something that's supposed to be a little bit more cinematic opposed to, I guess,
corporate.
Yes, less corporate, and I guess we can kind of talk about that in terms of like color grading versus color correcting, right? But yeah, just throwing on those types of filters just for the sake of it, because hey, why not? It looks cool.
Yeah.
To you.
Right.
But
will it look cool to everybody that watches,
exactly.
or will they just be kind of distracted by it?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'd say that to me, obviously outside of the cross fades and star swipes and the blind wipes and all the weird ones.
Don't use those weird transitions.
I don't understand why they put them in there, because no one ever uses those.
Right, unless you're really into PowerPoint. Because if you're like a PowerPoint king or queen, and then you go into like video editing, they're like, oh, I can use that transition that's in PowerPoint. Like,
super cool.
Yeah, exactly. Just like dodge it altogether. Yeah.
So, I guess still kind of in the editing realm. Yeah. Is there so just to use that as I kind of alluded to there with the color grading versus color correcting. For people who don't know, obviously color correcting is as it sounds. You are adjusting the color in the picture to have a proper white balance, because maybe for whatever reason,
white balance, exposure, all that kind of stuff.
That stuff was off during the recording just because maybe the lighting or maybe the camera setting didn't have a proper white balance. So you correct that within the editing software. Versus color grading is applying a stylistic kind of color, a feel to it. So if you wanted so it's more in the sake of a cinematic approach. So if you wanted to have the shot feel more cold because it's supposed to be like you're making a thriller or a sci-fi, or maybe add a little bit of greens. Because
take the Matrix for example.
Exactly.
A lot of the Matrix. If you're in the Matrix, I think is when it's green. There's more of a green hue to it. Go back and watch those movies, and I think when you're outside of the Matrix, like on the ship or whatever, it's more blue or a little bit more
colder.
It's a little bit more straightforward looking to the eye a little bit more. So that's like an example of doing color grading, but it influences, the feel of that scene. Yeah.
So that being said, is there anything that you do like just off the bat when it comes to color correcting?
It's a delicate balance, because within our work, we can only stylize stuff so much. Within my work, I try and color correct versus color grade a little bit more, obviously. Like I'm just looking to, we work, the cameras that we work with shoot in a very flat picture profile. So that means that it's up to you in post-production to bring all of the colors to life. Yeah. So, versus just taking a camera that you get like a digital SLR, Canon or whatever, and it's just on the standard picture profile, which is very saturated, it's very sharp, there's a lot of contrast. I like to have all of that control with me in post-production versus just having the camera assume this is what I want. So it shoots a little bit more flatter. It almost looks like there's kind of like a haze over your footage when you see it for the first time. You can YouTube it if you just look at like flat picture profiles or like red cinema or raw footage or whatever. If you see that, you're like, whoa, that looks terrible. It's because the data within that footage is so full, I should say, of data within that video codec that when you take it into your video editor, there's a lot of play and pull at the skin tones, the background, the black levels, the white levels, all that stuff, the midtones, all that kind of stuff is there for you to be able to pull at and adjust exactly the way you want it. So that's what I like to start with, but then that means that it's up to me to make sure I get my skin tones right, my highlights, my midtones, my black levels right. I don't want anything too contrasty, so with somebody with black hair, it's important that I'm like making sure that I have enough highlight on them with my lighting during production that, when I add my black levels or adjust my black levels to have a little bit more contrast on my footage, I'm not making their hair just look like a dome of just solid black. There still needs to be texture in the hair. So you can take it too hardcore, right? And that's a quick and easy way of knowing whether or not you took something too far within your black levels or your contrast is if you start to see that kind of just like flat out look on your black levels. Same thing with white. The hardest time you'll have this happen to you is if you're like trying to shoot outside on a sunny day. is when you'll see if you have things slightly exposed differently from your individual to the background or the sky. Maybe your sky is like blown out, and so to speak, which means that like it's just like white. It's just like a solid blanket of white, and there's you can't see the clouds, you can't see the blue sky, it's just white. So that same thing can happen to your white levels as well. So it's a matter of like not taking things in any way necessarily too far, and that's what I aim with within the corporate world. Within like if I'm doing like a wedding production or something a little bit more funky, I'm gonna up my saturation levels a little bit. Maybe I'll add a little bit more contrast, a little bit more crunch. Maybe I'll influence the colors a little bit. So it's like I don't want the bride's dress. Maybe I want the bride's dress to be, it's a white, but it's an off-white. It's like I have to pay attention to what off-white that is. Depending on the scene, maybe they're like getting married in an old church or something like that, and there's a lot of like wood around. Well, I want that warmth to be portrayed in the scene, so I'm gonna add a little bit more of a yellow hue as opposed to a bit more of a blue, because if I crisp it up too much, that wood just kind of looks flat and cold versus being warm and deep and brown. And you only add just like a little bit of like yellow to your white levels so that the bride's dress isn't coming off again like if you go the other way, it'll be very blue on the side of white versus being slightly warm and gold, just mildly. So it's like these little tweaks that you make that influence how a scene looks. And I think for a wedding, that warmth is what you want to go for more than that cold side, that blue. You want to go a little bit more to the warm colors, like your oranges, reds, yellows, that kind of stuff. Because again, it's all about love and like that warmth and kind of intimacy there. So that's kind of, you have to know what you're kind of like making a video about, right? And so I've been in a steel mill, or like in a steel factory. So it's like, in that kind of scene, I'm going towards more of a bluer color because the metal looks kind of crisper and more solid and strong versus like warm. And then, because if you do that on concrete and metal, it looks more dirty. So that kind of factory setting makes me want to go a little bit more blue, so things look a little bit more crisp and clean versus that yellow, which causes that almost dirtying effect. So all depends on the scene and what you're working with.
Definitely.
But just paying attention. So
cool. I think like I have nothing more that I needed to share in regards to things that I do.
I think
like I could, and I think this is a totally different episode, but I could like dive deep into like what I do motion graphic wise. But it's not so much of a staple that I have, it's just more of how my approach, and I feel it's a lot more technical. So to save our viewers and listeners a lot of time, I think I will just save that for another day because, like I said, it's a lot more technical. I'd say when it comes to my style, I like to have things a little bit more organic.
I was gonna say you're more of that organic style, and I think I try and do that with my footage, is like make it more organic and real as opposed to disjointed or pull somebody into a grander kind of thing, right? So and you're the same way with your organic style.
And just like my motion, I generally, using speed graphs and stuff, I like to have things have a little bit more of a, coming fast and ease in, or have a little bit of bounce or squeeze to it, just to give that more of, like I said, organic look to it.
It's not as hard and rigid, right?
So, and it's just a matter of how I time things out, and I work on specific, like I don't do values at random. I work in increments of this motion will happen at 24 frames, or it'll be half a second being 12 frames, or if I'm working at 60 frames, that's going to be 30 frames, or it'll be 3/4 of a second. So I kind of work like that, but
you have your thing down to kind of like a science, right?
And that's why I'm saying like how I kind of go about these things on the back end is, I'd say, more technical for that organic. So it's kind of funny now just saying that out loud, where it's just like I have this very technical approach to achieve an organic thing, right? So,
but because of history and because of what you've done in the past, you know that it works, right? It's like I want to see that again because this same rule applies to this same text that I'm creating or whatever. Right?
And I think what you just said right there is kind of the best way to wrap this episode up. Is that it really, you got to try things. Especially if you're new to this stuff, it's just a matter of trying things and finding out what works. and then applying that over and over. And then as you keep applying those things, it won't be so recognizable, but it might be. It depends on what those things are, because you will start applying it to everything. So it has that repetition, but then at the same time, you may start building on that, and then it becomes a little bit more unique to your style, right? And that's applicable to both you personally or the brand, because regardless of you working on that content for said brand, it's going to come through to the brand, and then that brand is going to adopt that style that staple.
Yeah, and it's up to you. Yeah, you got to make sure that you're being honest and true to that brand. Yeah, are you guys like the hip hop style of culture that like hip hop backing tracks really fit your videos, or is it something a little bit more subdued and a little bit more ambient? You know, that just like has still that drive, but it's less in your face and a little less funky per se, but more clean and professional. If you're like a finance institute or a bank or something, you don't necessarily want a hip hop track for the backing track of your testimonial for somebody or a user of your bank. It doesn't really make sense, right? So it's like kind of finding what you can do within your wheelhouse of your organization.
Yeah, and the other thing too on top of that, and like what's the saying? Great artists steal.
Oh yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
By all means, like seek out that inspiration from what other people do, and maybe not do exact carbon copies,
right?
but
bring it into your repertoire. Figure out how they do it, so you can. It's like build it so you know how to like break it down.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Get inspired. Get that influence. Learn how they did it. Tweak it. Adapt on that, and make it your own.
That's right.
Right.
Bam. Love it.
Make it your own.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So that wraps up today's episode. Get out there. Establish your style and
have some fun.
Make it your own.
Bam. See you guys.
Take care. Thanks for watching this episode of the Video Island podcast, brought to you by Vidyard. You can subscribe to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform or check out more videos here.